What's up, everybody? George the Gamer back again with another deep dive into Ban.Land. And, I can't get enough of this server. We've already gone through the wiki and those crazy anonymous interviews. We even took a crack at decoding those wild chat logs. But today, we're taking a different approach. We're going to follow one player's journey. And for this, I recently got to chat with Day. Now, Day documented his whole Ban.Land experience in this retrospective he wrote called Ban.Land, a Minecraft anarchy server retrospective. I'll link it below if you guys want to check it out. But what we're going to do today is basically use Day's story as like a guided tour through Ban.Land's history, from his very first moments on the server, all the way to his interactions with some of the biggest names on Ban.Land.
It's a really unique perspective, because Day joined during this time of massive change and upheaval. I'm really interested to see how he navigated this world and ultimately how he found his place in it.
Yeah, and the thing is, you got to remember how crazy it must have been to join Ban.Land for the first time. Dad actually describes it as like this. Imagine spawning in and immediately you're just bombarded by like these end crystals flying everywhere, hitting mobs, and these weird crystal prisons, and all these players who are just like super skeptical of you. He says his initial reaction was just confused. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't be?
Right. It's like it really highlights how Ban.Land wasn't just your typical anything goes anarchy server, There were all these almost unspoken rules and power dynamics and just these unique elements that really shaped the player experience. It wasn't just about mindless destruction. It was about navigating this complex social and political landscape.
Absolutely. And Day learns this pretty quickly, the hard way, unfortunately. It's Kingsy. He teams up with a couple of players, Space F and Mehaith.
Yeah.
And they stumble across these things called meme books. Now, I don't know if everyone remembers this, but for those who haven't seen our previous deep dives, meme books were these super rare and sought-after items on Ban.Land that had all these like unique properties that you could use for all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, they were like status symbols. If you had a meme book, you had power, you had wealth, you had prestige.
Exactly. And of course, meme books attract trouble. So this other player, Russ, tries to kill Day and his crew for them. Thankfully, they managed to escape. But it just goes to show you like how high the stakes were and how that threat of violence was always present on Ban.Land.
Yeah, it's a great example of how even in this supposedly lawless environment, there was still this hierarchy, this competition for resources and dominance.
For sure. So after surviving this encounter with Russ, Day and his buddies, they decide to form a group. And they call it, get this, the Meme Trinity. Even in the face of danger, they find a way to inject some humor into the situation.
Right. It shows how players used humor and memes as a way to cope with the often intense atmosphere of Ban.Land.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the humor doesn't last long. Day has another run-in, this time with a player who needs no introduction, Alpha Cheater. Now, in our previous deep dives, we talked about Alpha Cheater's infamous battle with Supreme Tech for control of the server. He was this almost mythical figure who was seen as a villain by some and a kind of anti-hero by others.
Yeah, Alpha Cheater was definitely polarizing. His actions really challenged the status quo and pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable.
Oh, yeah. He was constantly stirring the pot. And in Day's story, he plays a really interesting role. So Alpha Cheater gets this idea to reset the server, basically wipe out all the bases, and force everyone to live in harmony. Sounds kind of utopian on the surface, right?
It's a very paradoxical concept, trying to create order and unity through an act of mass destruction.
Yeah, exactly. But, of course, this is Alpha Cheater we're talking about. So things aren't quite that simple. He tries to trick Day by trapping him at the end spawn point, so he can't escape the server reset.
It's classic Ban.Land. Even with seemingly good intentions, the methods used were often morally ambiguous.
Oh, yeah, totally. Day eventually gets freed, though, thanks to an unexpected assist from Russ.
Yeah,
the same Russ who tried to kill him earlier. Ban.Land is full of these weird alliances and betrayals. Anyway, they team up with a few other players, including Cloudman, the New Athens faction, and they try to take down Alpha Cheater.
This alliance is really interesting because it brings together players from such different backgrounds. You have Russ, who was known for his unpredictable and aggressive tactics, working alongside Cloudman, who represents a more diplomatic and community-oriented approach.
Yeah. It's like the threat of Alpha Cheater's server reset forced everyone to put aside their differences and work together. Unfortunately, though, their plan fails. Alpha Cheater proves to be too powerful, and they can't stop him.
It just shows you how even in a world without rules, certain individuals can gain so much power and influence. that they can shape the experiences of everyone else.
And for Day, this experience with Alpha Cheater really marks a turning point in his Ban.Land journey.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how this encounter shaped his perspective and influenced his actions going forward.
And that is exactly what we'll be diving into next time. We'll explore Day's involvement in the legendary spawn base, his complex relationship with Supreme Tech, and the rise and fall of his own faction, UNXTY. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So last time we left off with Day facing off against Alpha Cheater and the whole server reset thing. I mean, talk about a crazy introduction to Ban.Land.
Right, thrown right into the deep end. But what's really interesting is how Day's motivations change after this. He goes from, like, just trying to survive to actively contributing to the community. Yeah, he actually joined Spawn Base. And for those who need a refresher, Spawn Base was that central hub, that got rebuilt like a million times throughout Ban. History. We talked about it in the Wiki Deep Dive, if you guys want to go back and check that out. But anyway, Day talks about how he starts really focusing on rebuilding Spawn Base, making friends, and just chilling out, really. But even chilling out on Ban.Land is its own kind of adventure.
Yeah, you got to remember, this is still Ban.Land we're talking about. Even when you're trying to build a community, there's this constant tension between wanting things to thrive and having to protect it from all the chaos.
Absolutely. And speaking of protecting things, Day's story really shows just how much of an impact Supreme Tech had. Remember Supreme Tech? The king of Ban.Land.
Oh, yeah. How could we forget?
Right. What's interesting here is Day joined after Supreme Tech was already in charge. So he didn't see, like, the whole rise to power thing firsthand. But he still saw Supreme Tech as this driving force behind a lot of what happened on Ban.Land. Someone who inspired other players to work together. These massive projects. Day even says he was a big motivator for almost every community project, as people just wanted to do their own thing without him.
It makes you wonder, though, like, is that kind of leadership even sustainable on an anarchy server? Can that unity last without someone at the top holding it all together?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
And we definitely see that tension play out. When Supreme Tech eventually goes inactive, Day says he actually lost a lot of his own motivation. And he even talks about, like, reaching out to Supreme Tech, even after he stopped playing, helping him out with server stuff behind the scenes, dealing with problematic players, including Alpha Cheater.
Wow. It sounds like there was a real connection there. Not just like king and subject, but almost like a mentorship or friendship.
Yeah, I think so. Forged in the fires of Ban.Land's chaos. Anyway, while all this is going on, Day starts his own faction called UNXTY. They were mostly focused on building. They actually created some of the early nether highways on the server. It started out strong, but as the faction grew, it became harder to manage.
Yeah, that's the classic struggle, trying to find the balance between individual freedom and the structure you need to keep a large group together.
Exactly. And for UNXTY, things kind of fall apart when they accidentally add a troll to the faction, and it just causes chaos from the inside.
Oof, he sounds rough.
Oh, yeah. It was not good. And this is all happening right around the time that Supreme Tech leaves.
Right, like the whole server's going through this major transition.
But Day doesn't give up on Ban.Land. He actually joins another faction, one we're already familiar with, New Athens.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
New Athens, the diplomats, with their elaborate builds and their intricate hierarchy.
Right. A very different vibe from UNXTY.
It almost seems like Day is going back to his roots in a way, seeking that sense of community and order that he found at Spawn Base.
Maybe. It's interesting. And within New Athens, he runs into Cloudman, who we've mentioned before. Day describes him as a friend and collaborator.
Cloudman is a fascinating figure. He represents this organized and strategic approach to anarchy. It's all about diplomacy, planning, maintaining order, totally different style of leadership compared to Alpha Cheater or even Supreme Tech.
Yeah, you're right. It shows just how diverse the leadership styles on Ban.Land were. But while all this is happening, there's another force at play that really impacts Day's experience. The infamous dupe era.
Ah, yes. The dupe era. Can't talk about Ban.Land without mentioning that.
Right. And it hit Day hard. He says he actually quit playing for a while because of it. It was just that demotivating.
I can imagine you spent all this time building something amazing, and then suddenly, everyone has access to unlimited resources. It's like, what's the point?
Exactly. He completely devalued all that hard work. Day specifically mentions the Christmas Eve dupe, where players figured out how to dupe items using books, and it just led to this insane influx of resources.
Stacks of diamonds, enchanted gear, everything.
It changed the whole game.
It's a fascinating period, but definitely controversial. Some people loved it. Others felt like it ruined the whole spirit of the server.
Yeah. That sense of challenge, the thrill of finding rare items, it all disappears when you can just duplicate anything.
Makes you wonder how things would have gone If the dupe era had never happened?
That's a good question. And it's something to think about. As we head into the final part of our deep dive, we'll be talking about the last days of Ban.Land, the lasting impact of the dupe era, and the mystery of Supreme Tech's departure. And we're back for the final chapter of Dae's Ban.Land story. We've seen him go from clueless newbie to community builder to faction leader, even becoming kind of a confidant to Supreme Tech himself.
Yeah.
But like all good things, Ban.Land eventually came to an end.
Yeah, it really is like watching the rise and fall of a civilization condensed into this digital world. And the dupe era that we talked about last time, it feels like that was kind of the turning point.
Yeah. Dae actually says that he quit playing for a while because of it. Like it was that demotivating for him. Imagine putting all that time and effort into building something incredible, and then suddenly, it's like it doesn't even matter anymore because everyone can just duplicate everything.
I get it. It completely changes the whole dynamic. The dupe era really exposed how fragile that whole ecosystem was.
Totally. And all of this is happening while the mystery of Supreme Tech's disappearance is unfolding. At first, Dae thinks maybe Supreme Tech just got rich off crypto or something and decided to move on. But Dae actually shares a conversation where Supreme Tech admits to feeling burned out. He says, I don't want to have to be the one to fix everything all the time.
It's kind of sad, actually, when you think about it. Even the king of Ban.Land was still just a person dealing with all this pressure and responsibility.
Yeah, it makes you realize that even in these crazy online worlds, there's still a human element. Dae even mentions that. Supreme Tech reached out to him for advice on how to handle Alpha Cheater after Supreme Tech went inactive.
Wow, that's amazing. The former leader asking for guidance from someone who was once just a new player trying to figure things out.
It really shows the level of trust and respect that they developed.
Even though Supreme Tech was gone, his presence was still felt.
Oh, yeah. Dae talks about how players would still talk about Supreme Tech, like speculate about his return, almost like he was a legend.
It shows you the kind of impact that leaders can have, even in virtual worlds. Their decisions shape the community long after they're gone.
As Ban.Land started to wind down, Dae stayed active. He kept throwing himself into community projects. He even formed a new faction with some friends. They focused on building massive farms and exploring new areas.
It's almost like they were trying to hold on to what made Ban.Land special, even as it was falling apart.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about that.
It speaks to that human desire to create and connect, even in the face of an ending.
Dae doesn't really go into detail about the server's final moments.
Yeah.
But he does talk about the sense of loss he felt. When it was all over, he says, it was like a whole chapter of my life closed.
Okay, bit gull. I think anyone who's been part of a tight-knit online community can relate to that.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even though these worlds are virtual, the connections we make in them are real.
So what can we take away from all of this? I think Dae's story and all the stories we've explored about Ban.Land show us that these anarchy servers are these fascinating contradictions. They're chaotic and unpredictable, but they can also foster these incredible communities.
It's a constant push and pull.
Yeah.
Between freedom and order, destruction and creation.
And within that chaos, countless stories unfold, each one adding to the legacy of the server. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. What do you think truly defines the legacy of Ban.Land? Was it the chaos, the community, the rise and fall of empires? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Every player's story adds another piece to the puzzle, and the exploration of Ban.Land continues. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.